back to another Sparkination conversation. For those of you that don't know what a Sparkination is, it's a spark that ignites passion, that leads to action, that changes what's normal. And no better person than my great friend and colleague, Glenn Capelli. We're coming together today, Glenn, to have a conversation about systems thinking.
Oh, Sparkination, I love it. And even something that rhymes, a Sparkination conversation for innovation. This is excellent. And systems, beautiful topic, Mr. Berry.
Yeah, and I reckon, as I said to you offline, no better person than you to be having this conversation with. I thought we might start with I mean, I've been having a look at this. I've had a look at Ayn Rand. I've done a little bit of a look at Joanna Macy. I've done some reading on Russell Ackoff. I've gone to Edwards Deming. I've looked at De Bono, your great pal, who you had the great fortune of presenting with. But I actually settled on Peter Senge, his definition of systems thinking. I reckon it's not a bad place to start. He said that systems thinking is a discipline of seeing wholes. It's a framework for seeing interrelationships rather than the things, for seeing patterns of change rather than the static snapshots. I reckon that's a good place to start, mate.
Well, if that one comes from probably the fifth discipline or some of his other writings, but yeah. And I must say that I did need to read the fifth discipline at least 5 times before I worked out what the fifth discipline was. So, well, and that's good in some ways, because
it's better than me. It took me 8.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing. And if you're looking, what was that about? Whole. So you got the whole. Yeah. Then you've got all the elements within the whole, and then the interrelationship with it and all. So if we were looking at a bit of signing from the deaf community, it might be this, and this, so and
this, and this.
Well, there's the whole and all the parts that make up the whole, but how they interrelate with all other things.
Yeah, wonderful.
And maybe that's just coming out, and then it goes out to the bigger, broader picture of it all. And that's probably why it's a tricky thing in some ways, because, and I say tricky because a lot of human beings seem to struggle with systems thinking, even though we are a system ourselves.
Yes.
In the interrelated, we seem to find it easier to go yes, no, singular or binary. And sometimes singular and binary can be a wonderful thing in the world. There are some things that have single answers. There are some things where you need to understand sometimes this has got this, the polar things. But to really understand the interrelationship of all of those factors, that becomes tricky. And leadership is tricky. Creating an environment of systems thinking is tricky. So, yes, Senge, was writing about learning organisations, which is really systems of learning, systems of thinking. How do we have conversations? How do we have meetings? Why do we have meetings? What way do we guide that? What way do we nudge it? This incredible brain of ours and being of ours. And so I know you would be a big fan of this idea, Ian, that if you can understand systems thinking, or let's call it ecology.
Yeah, nice word.
The echoes then of life, then it's a beautiful thing for our health, for our relations, for our marriages, for our separations, for how we go about everything that we do.
Yes, I agree. Now, it seems like eons ago, but I did refresh my memory of it. I've still got it in the bookshelf here, but you wrote a book called Thinking Caps.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of wonderful things in there. And I was just, because it's a bit cold here in Victoria, probably different to where you are in Western Australia, Glenn, but I had to have the beanie on just a little while back. And as I put it on, I thought of Thinking Caps, because earlier I was out walking with a more traditional cap. But I wonder if you might tell us about Thinking Caps, because I know De Bono had 6. He had 6 thinking hats.
Mm.
which were wonderful insights. But tell us about this thinking caps. What's the central idea?
Well, I guess Edward's hats and my caps kind of have a relationship, and that's that sort of thing in life. Go back to my university years, and I went into one of my tutes, and I must admit I hadn't done the pre-reading for this tutorial, so I was a bit thinking I'd have to fake my way through. The chap running the tutorial, he said, listen, you've all got a chance to leave today. You don't have to attend this tute because I'm not going to cover the regular things that we are supposed to be covering. We're not going to be looking at T.S. Eliot and his poetry today. I want to do a workshop on a tutorial on the thinking of this man. And he pulled out a book, and it was Lateral Thinking by Edward de Bono.
Right.
So this is like early 1970s, so probably mid-1970s. And it was just amazing. You know, he was a guy that started to teach us or let us think about thinking and lateral thinking, different parallels of thinking, different ways of thinking.
Yeah.
So it inspired my brain that I've always looked at how we learn and how we think as human beings. Now, decades later, we fast forward in this way that time and space works, get a phone call from a speakers bureau saying, we'd like you to speak at a conference. Oh, fantastic, magic. The conference is going to be in Canada at Chateau Lake Louise. Oh, even better. And you're going to kick off the conference, and following you will be a chap by the name of Edward de Bono.
How good.
The way the world works, you know, the relationship, this man that had inspired me years, decades before, and that was the first time Edward and I got to work together. Now, Edward was big. After lateral thinking and other things, he came up with his thinking hats, the 6 different thinking hats or different styles of thinking. How thinking caps came into being is, but my name's Capelli. All my mates call me Cap or Kappa, and I happen to be captain of my footy team, but Capelli in Italian is the Italian word for hair, which you've got to love irony in life. You've got to love opposites, you know, you've got to love contradictions. So I was doing work presenting for the ABC radio, and Rosemary Green, producer there, asked if I'd do a weekly segment with Peter Holland, and that we would call it thinking caps, because, you know, you put on your thinking cap.
Yeah.
So every week I would write a piece about thinking and how we think and what we might think, and get people to think and get people to be inspired to ring in with their thoughts. And that's how thinking caps came to be. So for the next 4 years in Melbourne on 3AW, we ran this thing called thinking caps, and 40 of the pieces most of what I present found their way into our book. But it's really the fact, and this is the inspiration of it all, in that often on radio, you know, say for example, by the time we're getting towards the end of our radio shows, they wanted to get how many callers could they get calling in? How many callers can we get? So that's quantity. They're ticking the quantity box.
Yeah.
I'm going, no, hold on. It doesn't matter about how many. I need to spend time with certain callers and each caller, because somewhere in that call, there will be something magic that evolves about the topic we're talking about. There'll be something that emerges, and how we ask the questions and how we approach it all will be the unearthing of this thing.
Yeah.
But they were, you know, we just wanted more, rather than spending time and going deeper. Now, the more approach, tick the box, is more about perhaps an analytical. We've done 10 of those, 10 people have called in. Whereas the systems approach, the ecological approach, is not just about analytical. Analytical's got to be part of it, but it's about creative. It's about emotional. It's about the belief that somewhere inside human beings there is something of wonder to discover.
Yes.
If we can just unearth it and then connect to it. So in many ways, de Bono, different ways of thinking, the thinking hats become thinking caps, the radio, but it is the fact that we were looking at doing an interesting, exciting radio program because you believe that in the system of every human being, in this ecology of that individual in front of us, there are unique things, but those unique things connect us because we can all relate to them.
Yes.
And that might be just one of the things about what systems thinking or ecological thinking actually is.
I was reflecting as you were speaking there. Wonderful insights, all of it. What was going on in the background for me was we've got all these systems in the world at the moment that are doing the hard yards. You know, our financial system, our educational system, our political system, our business system, our health system, they're all struggling. My sense is that they're no longer fit for purpose. Maybe they never were. But I wonder what's happened. Just in my reading of late, it seems like, I think the scientific revolution was about, it began in the mid 1500s, and there was a lot going on up until 1700s, and that's when there were lots of constitutions written, the American Constitution, for example, another system. But it seems like our thinking might be a bit stuck today. A couple of decisions in the US Supreme Court. On one day, they're saying it's okay to carry guns, and on the next day, they're saying, well, 3 days later, I think it was, you can't have an abortion. So one day you can carry a gun, and then next day they're pro-life. What's going on, Glenn, in the world with our systems? You know, we've got inflation in the financial system attacking us here again. In Australia, cost of living, the war in Ukraine. It seems like there's a lot of chaos going on, and yet what you're suggesting is that we've got an ecology within our own brains, our own hearts too, I would say, hearts and brains, that allows us to thrive in this world of chaos.
There's so much again there, Ian, and I believe we've never fully understood systems or ecology, and when we call an education system, we define it in a certain way, or in a definition way rather than the ecological way. We're not looking at the individuals within sitting at each desk and their uniqueness and their unique brain, and from that unearthing talent and discovering, we're going, okay, can you pass this particular exam? Can we tick this particular box? And when the more now we do need the analytical, and there are some things in life that have got absolute correct answers. They are convergent when you understand the problem and it narrows down, and then, oh yes, there's the correct answer. And a lot of business, you need the absolute correct answers. In understanding history, there are some things that we do need to understand, dates and times, and they need to be accurate. But that's only part of what makes an ecology. But it tends to be the easier part because we can tick it right or wrong. We can do the binary. Oh, yes, they've got that right. No, they've got it wrong. And the trickier part is that within all of our things, to get that bit right, but that's only the starting point. Now, where's the creative? Where's the practical? Where's the emotional? Where's the connectivity of us as human beings? And it becomes really, really easy for somebody to be very strong and strident and loud when the world is confused, when the world is complex, when there are complex challenges to us as human beings. Something in our brain goes looking for the long, loud, single, supposedly strong voice. And we go, oh, yep, and now I don't need to think, I'm just going to follow that voice. You know, that voice is telling me what to do or what is true. And that to me is a real danger, because it's an even more thing that will lead us towards a Hitler type factor, that we will follow a certain voice or way because, oh, they're telling us this and we will go that way, rather than, okay, let's think this through. What's the connectivity of us as human beings? What to really understand something like the environment, to really understand education, to understand, you know, my friend Walter Mikak, losing his wife and his kids at the horror of Port Arthur, to empathise it takes a depth within, as you say, the heart, the brain, the being, mingling of us together to understand it, to go, how can I understand this way of thinking? And now what can we do about it? And therefore we make these kind of decisions. But it is so easy to come in and go, no, that's too tricky. We just need to go right, wrong, good, bad, ban it. And for some brains, that seems to be a way that they want to go, as opposed to really discovering who we are and our potential, the potential vision. And to save this planet of ours, I think we're going to have to get this happening.
So I wonder why. I think I partly know why, but I wonder why some people want to really explore this, and a lovely word you've used a couple of times so far, unearth. There's a lot of folk want to unearth this magical brain of ours and this unique heart of ours, and yet it seems like an equal number of people want this strong, strident, loud, as you say. I mean, we wouldn't be unkind by calling it Trumpism, would we? Because that's exactly what's happening, isn't it? Putin probably as well, in a different way. And yet, so we seem to have this group of folk that'll just follow blindly, and another group of folk who want to think for themselves and want to work it out themselves. And we've probably got another group of people who are not doing either of those two.
Yeah, for me, I think we've got all of those groups within ourselves. You know, the wonder of Walt Whitman that we contain multitudes. So there is an element of our brain and our heart and our being that strives for, longs for an answer, a correct answer, the yes factor, that 1 + 1 = 2. I've got that now. Yeah. Even lyrics of songs that tell us, we're going to the chapel, we're going to be married, and I'll never be lonely anymore. Well, that's wrong. But we want to believe it. We do. So there's this element within us. And if we can understand that there is this element within us, and there are times when that element is absolutely appropriate in life. There are some things in life we need to be accurate on, definite on. There are correct answers. That way we can work out our finances and not go broke. We can work out our budgets and not overspend, etc. But at the same time, there is an element inside, I think, every human being that the trickier road, that incredible road that is a mysterious road too, and therefore a bit scary. Yeah, a fear factor keeps us away from it. But if we can recognise that we've got this element within us, and then we've got this element within us. So sometimes when we're going to take a bit of a leap, the fear factor will come in and we can close down. But we go, hold on. No, I'm going to make that call. Hold on. Now I'm going to stand up and speak this voice. And that's a trickier way. And it's a more difficult environment in some ways to create, because it means you've got to listen to people, you've got to take time with things. I was speaking with our very good friend Steve Simpson recently, and Simo was talking about his unwritten ground rules and the unearthing the cultures and things. And an organisation that had one of its values was innovation. But at the moment, they're doing very little innovative thinking, talking, meetings, anything, because they're so busy. And Simo said, so I had to say to them, hold on, so your value is conditional? If your value is innovation, then you do it when you're busy, because you're busy. And I think the world has become kind of busy, and we've kind of forgotten that, sometimes we need to take time with certain things. And when we take that time, it might be a more difficult road to get there. Yes. Once we've got there and we've got this environment where it can happen, it can then happen easier and with what Csikszentmihalyi calls flow. So it's trickier to get there, but once we're there, the marriage, the relationship, the business, it's pretty exciting. You touched on a thing that I think stops us from here, and you mentioned it, the fear factor. It seems like
lots of things have been weaponized by the media and by politicians, and that's just stoked the fear factor. I've been reflecting on this, and as I've looked over my own life and look back, and I see the things that I thought I was frightened of. You know, like once upon a time, I was frightened of an audience, you know, and yet I went on to make a living like you as a professional speaker. But once upon a time, I was scared out of my wits to, you know, be in front of a group of people. My natural way as a child and as a person was shy. You know, I had to learn how to be still retain my own essence, but it was a different world. And so that was one fear that I guess I had to overcome. How does thinking, systems thinking, help us to overcome our fears?
You know, the fear of giving, the fear of receiving, the fear of loving an individual, you know, the fear of giving up an identity and taking on another identity. So many of these things are a part of us. And I do think we need to understand that within ourselves. You know, for one of the tools of leadership, the mirror and the window, we do need to look in the mirror at times and understand our full self and where's our default position, where's our default thinking, and at the same time, how we view the mirror. You know, they looked at the great leadership and, you know, the leaders of excellence rather than good, from good to great, Jim Collins.
Yeah.
So the great leaders, well, some leaders would look in the mirror and go, whenever there was a success, and go, well, I'm a champion. How bloody good am I? I created all of that. And whenever something would go wrong, they'd look out the window and go, who's to blame? You know, who are we going to blame there? I mean, Senge, thou shalt always find an external agent to blame. He said, you know, that's one of the dangers of that prevents the systems thinking in the fifth discipline. But Collins said that great leaders, when things go badly, they will look in the mirror and go, okay, is there anything we're doing that might have caused this? Is there anything we've failed to do? Is there anything that we've done as a civilization that might have created this environment where this can happen? And it doesn't mean you're going to accept the blame, but you've got to at least look and explore. And when things go really well, great leaders look out that window and go, what a great team. It's taken a whole team of people to be able to do this. So to get that ability to think in that way, it does mean doing two tricky things. One is looking at yourself with honesty and accuracy, and another is to be able to have a mentality where you're looking for the good and the tiny little things that people have done that are magic or something wonderful, and you're looking out that window and you're saying, hey, listen, I'm going to name this. Good on you for doing that. Well done for doing that. I need to thank the team, because without the team, this wouldn't have happened. And just every now and again, you know, I remember a small story from, you know, our lives as speakers meant that we spent a lot of time in airports in days gone by. And I was in Adelaide at an airport waiting to board a plane, and there's a group of teenagers. Obviously, to me, one of them was leaving, and it looked like they were an international student, probably has spent a year at the school. The kid spoke with an American or North American accent, Canadian or US, I couldn't work out. Everyone, this good-looking young lad, everyone was around him, patting him on the back, giving him hugs, what have you. And his mate was a tall, thin lad standing next to him all the way, sort of smiling and what have you. And then I looked to the side and I saw a girl weeping from their group, but she was weeping. She was aside, she was in tears. And this tall lad, you know, looked around, and it was kind of, you know, Stephen Marchand, who writes comedy with Ricky Gervais, is that kind of tall, thinny, gawky, and he sees this young lass, and he goes over to her, has a conversation, and then he comes back to his mate who's about to leave Australia, and he says something into his ear, As soon as he says it, this kid looks around, looks to where that girl is, and goes immediately over to her and puts his arms around her and brings her into the group. And I watched all of this. And I thought, that's brilliant. And then I thought, oh, no, I have to say something. So I went up and tapped this kid on the tall kid on the shoulder. And I said, excuse me, mate, you don't know who I am, but have I got it right that what I just saw happen was, and that girl was upset because your friend's leaving and you noticed, and then you told your mate about it? Is that what just happened? And he said, yeah, as if he'd done something wrong. And I said, listen, mate, you don't know who I am and the work I do, but I can tell you that what you just did was fantastic. What you just did was magic. And it was magic because a lot of people don't think that way or look that way. And if you can keep nurturing that as a human being, you're going to be a really successful person. You're going to have a wonderful life.
Yes. Yeah, that's one of the keys I've found. I know myself. You'd remember the great Doug Malouf. One of the things that I learned from Doug, he said to me one time, it's always about the audience. And so when you go to speak at an event, be at the door, greet them all. If there's 5,000, doesn't matter. If there's 500, if there's 50, doesn't matter. Shake hands with everyone, look them in the eye, because when you get out there and you see them in the audience, you're already friends. And I thought that was a wonderful insight. And I guess it was one of those lessons that I've learned, I'm still learning. And that is that the secret to a lot of things is to be in service of other people, which is what your new friend in the airport was doing, wasn't he?
Indeed, and that advice of the wonderful Doug Malouf. My mate Andrew Bellotti, Jane Bellotti, great teachers, great educators, and Andrew, every single class he's got, he welcomes the kids into that class, shakes their hand, says g'day, does a high bump or whatever it might be, but he creates individual relationship. He makes sure he knows their parents, he knows the challenges that they're going through. It's a relationship. So when there is a challenge, and there will be a challenge, when there is a difficulty, it's not just, okay, let's kick this kid out, let's ban him from school or ban him from the class. It's the more complex road of a relationship, and let's find the talent within and somehow nurture that and grow that.
Yeah.
And that's, Andrew was a presenter for us in our youth program that we wrote, and one of the things that I have a magic brain, and that magic brain's chock-a-block full of crayons, and every crayon's a talent. Let's find the talents and unearth them, and then use some of the strong crayons to build up some of the others. Yeah. And that's an ecological approach that takes creative, analytical, practical, emotional intelligences, not just an IQ. It goes beyond the IQ. And it's thinking in systems, because it's believing that somewhere in there is that magic inside that person. And yes, some of their behaviours may demonstrate the opposite of it. They may polarize the opposite of it. So let's find out why that's happened. And that's a more complex road.
Yes.
But it could be the healing road.
I mean, they're hand in glove, aren't they? In the service of others. But in order to really serve others, we've got to know ourselves. Mm. And eventually we've got to get to a point of trusting ourselves.
Yeah, and knowing sometimes we will stuff up. we'll get it wrong, and not to be so afraid of that. I mean, the embarrassment factor, the shame factor can stop a lot of good learning from happening, and can take us away from this ecological thinking that we need to be doing.
One of the, holding up one of my flip charts, just up, that's it, just here. I'm out of the view there, but it's a reminder, because I look at it every day when I walk into my office here, but it's those wonderful words of Shakespeare, this above all, to thine own self be true. And that requires wholeness thinking, doesn't it? It requires, I guess in a way, I know psychologists have talked about this in a different way, but we've got all these personalities, we've got a whole ecology inside of ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's getting to know the analytical, it's getting to know the musical, it's getting to know the artistic, whatever it might be, we've got all these different sides of ourselves, haven't we? And systems thinking, I think, begins in a way with getting to know all these different parts of ourselves, so that we know ourselves, and then we trust ourselves, and then we bring our whole selves in the service of others.
Yeah, no, beautifully put. And I happened to be listening to an interview with Robbie Coltrane, the actor. I think he became Hagrid in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
But he said a wonderful thing. He said if as another planet sent their beings down to Earth and said, okay, we want to understand human beings. He said, well, you should get all the collected works of William Shakespeare, give them to them and say, read these and come back in 5 years and you'll fully understand human beings. And there is something, and even in the ecological thinking that we're talking about, you know, how many of our leaders, some of the leaders that we know now, I've certainly ones I've worked with, that they will read stuff that's non-fiction, but they won't read fiction. They've never explored some of the great themes that are explored in Russian literature or whatever it may be. And if we don't explore that, the poet within ourselves, and that's why, you know, with the methodologies we use in organisations, the same as what we use with schools, there will be poetry, there will be movement, there will be sign language, there will be so many, and yet we sometimes want to just keep the business world as only the facts, only the figures, only the analytic, and it's never that. If you're going to have sustainable high performance, it's never that. It's about teams, true teamwork coming together and unearthing all kinds of magic in the innovation and creativity of it, as well as that attention to detail that goes deep, deep, deep.
There's that wonderful word again, unearthing, and another word that you've used, which I guess is perhaps a word for a different word for systems thinking, one that was a favourite of you and I, and that's methodology. Is systems thinking and methodology, are they describing the same thing or are they different?
Well, if we see within the methodology that there are many ways of learning in the many lands of smart, and therefore many ways to be, then that is a very ecological way to see the world. That is very much a systems thinking or an eco-zen, an ecology zen.
Yes.
And also at the same time, when we lose on some of those things, when we don't really get the emotional, when we don't really get the practical, when we don't get the human side of it working, when it does become easier to just go follow a singular voice. And I know I've said this to you before, Ian, my friend Eugenia Lenda.
A great Russian.
Yeah, well, great Ukrainian, Ukrainian born, Ukrainian raised, then went and studied his geophysics in Russia, in other parts of Russia, because Ukraine was part of Russia then. And then he ends up in a kibbutz learning Hebrew, and his roommate is an Australian kid from Kalgoorlie, which happened to be me. And, you know, Zhenya, just such a wise man, now an absolute respected elder in the field of geophysics, etc., and just in the field of life too. And when I went back to see him in Tel Aviv a couple of years ago, he said, Glenn, maybe it is our fault. And I said, okay, what have we done, Zhenya? What have we done? He said, well, you and me and all of us who believe in love, all of us who believe in together, all of us who believe in humanity, we have to get better at getting that message across, because they, and then he used a swear word, they are winning. And he was talking Netanyahu, Trump, North Korea, you know, Putin. You know, he had been on the receiving end of some of the horrors of those kind of regimes. Yeah. Yes, we somehow need to be able to get across. It's easier to push a message of it's their fault, let's get rid of them, they're wrong, than this more complex message of let's understand each other and bring that togetherness together, and that the differences to be celebrated and link us to life. The rest of life as a system, because we could quite easily do ourselves out of a service. The human beings don't have to exist. We could go and animals would probably thrive. You know, the air might even thrive. So for us to maintain our bit in this privilege, then we got to show the actions. Maybe it is that we've got to get better at communicating our message and being our behaviour of that.
Yep, you're absolutely right, and I think that includes understanding the perspectives of people we might disagree with. I was talking in an earlier forum, one of my Wise Leaders peer groups. We've been having this conversation for quite some time now. We sort of go there in different places, but if we're going to a meeting and we're already opposing the idea that's going to be discussed in the meeting, then the meeting's not going to work. There has to be an openness to reach a shared view, which might be that I've got to let go some of what I hold dear, and maybe you've got to let go some of what you hold dear. But in lots of situations in the world today, there is not a willingness to do that. And so you and I and billions of others have got to model the path that there is no right or wrong. Rather, there's a way to come together and respect each other's views, but come to a higher view, because you've got your view and I've got mine. Maybe you should go that way for the deaf. But it's our views, the strongest one. And we've got to role model that approach rather than, and I've been guilty as anyone is doing this, rather than putting down the people we disagree with, we've got to somehow model the way that let's come together and let's find a better way forward.
Yes, and certainly to understand where they're coming from and in what context some of that might even be a bit correct. I mean, my wonderful mate, I mean, when you live in a kibbutz and you're learning Hebrew and then you're picking apples and you're doing all that, and you're late at night, you're having conversations. One night I convinced Shenya to tell us about what it was like to live and work in Russia. So we did a little presentation on this. And I asked him about, you know, I said, so America and Russia are very, very different. He said, oh, Glenn, here we have America, here we have Russia, almost side by side, little gap. And here we have a big circle. And yes, we're all of this difference in some ways, but we are so much similar in other ways.
Yes,
we can learn from each other. And I think that's true when you've got that person that's seemingly here and you're here, that maybe there's some of this. And if you can find that connected ground,
it's not seeing this, is it? We don't see the circle. We just see the little bit. We don't see the whole, which of course is where we begun.
Yeah,
conversation.
When have I felt like that? How have I ever felt like that? That what they're expressing? Well, yeah, there's been times, so let me express this. And then, so now let's see if we can now use that and see if this gap, which can be you know, sometimes a very fearful gap and a very dangerous gap. It can use somebody to pick up a gun and kill somebody because of the colour of their skin. To actually understand when we get all of this, then it might help us to get some of this. Or at least that these actions will not become toxic and dangerous and deadly.
I think that's a wonderful place to conclude today, my friend.
Well, we'll honour my mate Genya Lander, and his sister still lives in a village just outside of Kiev, and she's unable to get out, but thankfully she's still with us. You know, great challenges for every human being on the planet at the moment, for all of us in a more privileged place to be able to have that connectivity and understanding, and we can be the voice for them.
Indeed, and I'm a strong believer that when we have found our own voice, we are in a place to inspire others to find theirs.
Yeah. Magic, mate. Always a pleasure, Mr. Ian Berry.
Good on you, mate. I've been with Glenn Capelli, and I think we'll extend this conversation, but we'll see you next time.